I'm Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor.
Very, very rocky.
Death by government.
Drain the swamp.
Hello and welcome to another installment of Liberty Nation's Swamponomics videocast. I'm Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor. This week, is inflation making a comeback? The November Consumer Price Index, or CPI, report was released on December 11th, and it was not something that President-elect Donald Trump, the Federal Reserve, or consumers wished to see. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the annual inflation rate ticked up to 2.7% in November, the second straight monthly increase. On a monthly basis, the CPI rose 0.3%. Core inflation, which excludes the volatile food and energy categories, held steady at 3.3% for the third consecutive month. The measure also rose 0.3% from October to November. The biggest drivers of inflation last month were shelter and food, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The food index surged 0.4%, and supermarket prices climbed 0.5%. 4 of the 6 major grocery store food categories rose, and restaurant and fast food prices edged up 0.3%. If you study the food category in the CPI report, and why wouldn't you, you will see some sizable monthly increases. Beef and veal, for example, rose 3.1%. Eggs soared more than 8%. Ham jumped 3.9%, and potatoes rose 3.3%. Meanwhile, shelter, which the Fed insisted would have fallen by now, remained elevated. Shelter jumped 0.3% and is up 4.7% from a year ago. Of course, as a retiring economist Paul Krugman said, if you remove shelter, food, and cars from inflation, there is no inflation. Meanwhile, services inflation was also sticky and stubborn and stayed at 4.7% for the second consecutive month. Now, the good news was a steady decline in energy inflation. While the energy index inched higher by 0.2%, it is down 2% from last year. In addition, gasoline has fallen more than 8% from a year ago, though it jumped 0.6% on a month-over-month basis. But that is where the good news stops. When the inflation bomb went off, it reset overall prices by at least 20%, though it is higher in other categories. Car insurance and household electricity costs, for example, have soared 52% and 32% respectively since January 2020. What's more, today's inflation trends are mirroring the patterns of the 1970s and 1980s, as this chart from Apollo chief economist Torsten Slok shows. Now, is this a surprise? Not really, considering that the Federal Reserve's money supply has risen every month in 2024. In fact, the money supply is as high as it was in December 2022. The Producer Price Index and the Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index should be riveting inflation measures to watch in the coming months. So, what does this mean for Federal Reserve policy? The consensus is that the central bank will follow through on another quarter-point interest rate cut in December. The rest of 2025 is up in the air. Investors, at the time of this video, expect the Fed to hold steady in January. Moreover, there is talk about whether the Fed should start to slow the pace of the rate-cutting cycle it started in September, or even hit the pause button. Here's what St. Louis Fed President Alberto Musalem said at a recent Bloomberg Monetary Policy Conference. Quote, "Along this baseline path, it seems important to maintain policy optionality, and the time may be approaching to consider slowing the pace of interest rate reductions or pausing to carefully assess the current economic environment, incoming information, and evolving outlook." For now, Fed Chair Jerome Powell has signaled that he is content inflation is hovering closer to 3%, despite the institution's long-standing 2% inflation objective. With the incoming administration unlikely to take a chainsaw to spending a la Argentina's Javier Milei and potentially slapping a high across-the-board tariffs, the price inflation flame could be rekindled in 2025. Inflation is a lot like that line from Al Pacino in Godfather Part 3. Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. That's it for me this week. Please read my full Swamponomics column on the pages of LibertyNation.com And be sure to check out my previous Swamponomics TV videos and interviews. As always, please like and comment on these clips. Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates or campaigns or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. Thank you, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
I'm Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor.
Very, very rocky.
Death by government.
Great.